Welcome everyone. As Mike said, this is the third in our series of webinars presented collaboration between AH Editing and the EQUATOR Network. I'm here at the UK Equator Centre at the University of Oxford, and we're really excited to present this third session on writing great health research articles. So to catch you up with what we've done before, we spoke 3 weeks ago about what makes a fantastic journal article, so what we're aiming for. And then last week, we talked about the whole planning process, everything you should do before you even start to write, everything you and your co-authors need to talk about. And if you'd like to catch up on those, all of those webinars are available on AH Editing's Facebook page, so you can catch them up straight after this if you're excited. But what we're going to do today is we're going to write that rough draft. We are going to go through your journal article from start to finish, and we're going to write your complete journal article. Just a rough draft. This doesn't need to be perfect, but that's what we're going to produce. As Mike mentioned, we have a moment for Q&A at the end of the session. So any questions, any comments, pop them in the comment box as you go along, and we'll take some time at the end to answer your questions. So, are you excited to produce that rough draft? I'm sure you are. Let's get going. So today, what we're going to be talking about is an approach to writing. So we're going to take a step-by-step approach to writing so that we don't get freaked out about that empty page. We're then going to focus in on methods and results, then on the discussion and the introduction, and finally, we're going to spend a couple of moments on the abstract. So first up, how to approach writing. So if you're like me, a blank, empty page is kind of terrifying. It's too much. There's nothing there. Where do you even start? And we're going to talk for a moment about how to take that great, big, enormous task of write a journal article, and we're going to break it up into some easy, bite-sized chunks that we can actually deal with, which is basically going to mean taking that page and chunking it up into sections and subsections. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use all of that stuff that we did last time where we planned. So we got a piece of paper and we thought through exactly what we were going to write, what kind of article we wanted to write. We defined our message, we defined our audience. So go grab that piece of paper, now's the time to use it. And two of the things you've specified in your plan was your target journal and your publication type. And from those pieces of information, you went to your target journal and you collected your instructions for authors. And you also collected the right reporting guideline for your study type. So you've got your instructions for authors, you've got your reporting guideline. Your instructions for authors will give you the big section headings that you need for your article. And typically, for most journal articles, you're going to be following the IMRAD formula. That's introduction, methods, results, and discussion, with maybe conclusions tacked on the end. But it's worth checking in your journal, in the instructions to authors, because different types of articles will have different big section headings. And then you're just going to take them and pop them straight into that big, blank, empty document. I like to put each of these big section headings onto their own page each. It makes the document feel like you're winning. You've got 6 pages already, and your word count is already popping up. You can also pop them all on the same page if you'd like, with a bunch of enters in between, some clear line space. But it's still quite a big, frightening, empty page. We need to chunk it up some more. And that's where your reporting guideline becomes so helpful. The reporting guidelines give you your subheadings. And as we said last week, reporting guidelines don't say a lot about your introduction and your discussion, but they get into the nitty-gritty of methods and results, because what they're doing is reminding you of the minimum information your reader needs to understand your study. So what does that reporting guideline look like? It's just a checklist. So here's the checklist for consort, for randomized controlled trials. And remember, there's a guideline for every single study type on our website, equatornetwork.org. Right, so you can see it doesn't say much about intro, just says background and objectives. But under the method, loads of subheadings that you can grab. Trial design, participants, interventions, outcomes. And in this moment, don't stress about what you're going to say under each of those subheadings. Just grab them and chuck them straight into your document. That's all you're doing at this stage, grabbing those subheadings, popping them in to give yourself some structure for planning your writing. Now, we've said the reporting guidelines say a lot about what you did, but not much about the chatty part of the paper, the intro and the discussion. And you can get some of those extra subheadings for your intro and your discussion from your message and from your audience. What was your message that you wanted to carry out? That will tell you a couple of your key subheadings for your discussion and your audience next step. What did you want people to do with this? That will form another subheading under your discussion. But now you've basically got a structure. You know exactly what you're going to be writing. Ooh, what's next? We need to start to write. And there's this great tool called key sentences. So key sentences essentially summarize each section or subsection. It's just one sentence that describes the paragraph, the subsection, the section that you're going to write. So you're just going to pop those in. And don't get too stressed at this moment about grammatically correct, about making a perfect sentence. This is just a reminder for yourself what I need to say in this section. What's the big idea that I really want to get across in each section and subsection under each of these headings? And when I say that, it starts sounding a lot like the elevator pitch we talked about. It's a lot like that message, that 2 to 5 sentences that describes your article. So you're basically going back to that plan and grabbing your message and popping it straight into your paper. See, this is why setting up the plan beforehand makes your writing process so much easier. So it's basically your elevator pitch turns into your key sentences. And do that for every section and subsection heading. It's just an aid for yourself as you're going to now write the rest of each paragraph. So that's all you need to do next. That's all you need to do next, right? Is just fill in the text. Just write what you need to explain under each subheading. That's sounding like a fairly big task, right? It's still a fairly overwhelming task. Where do you even start? And the suggestion is start with the section that requires the least creative thought. The method section, you spent a lot of time, a lot of energy thinking about a year ago, 2 years ago, but you've done the creative thinking. Now you just need to tell us what you did. There's no creativity, there's no thought, just pop it down. Then the next section that doesn't require too much thought is your results. What you found is what you found. You can't change it. That's all there is. So just pop it in. You've already decided when you planned your message which results you're kind of talking about, what your story is. And your section headings, your subsection headings are telling you which elements you'll be talking about. So now you're just describing your results. Great. And now that you've got the things that don't require too much creativity, now we can move on to the things that require a bit more thought. The discussion, where we talk about what it all means. And then that bigger idea, that introduction, where does this study sit in terms of all studies that have ever been done? And only then do you want to start worrying about summarizing the whole paper in that abstract. And only then do you want to do that final summary, that title. So that's an order that you can work through that's not too difficult and challenging. It takes you through step by step. And I've got one other tip before we start to get focused in on each section. Just write. The writing process and the editing process are two different things. When you're writing, write. When you're editing yourself, when you're polishing your words, do that separately. As you're writing, don't censor yourself. Don't fix the spelling, don't fix the grammar, don't worry if the sentence doesn't really work, just get it down on the page. It's much easier to come back separately on another day and do that edit process. So right now, all we're doing is writing. Awesome. So that's the approach. What are you actually going to write in each section? So let's start with that least creative, most fixed in place section, the methods and the results. So the methods, and the big key sentence here, the big key idea you're getting across is the recipe. How did you do it? That's all that your method is trying to get across. How much detail is going to come down to, is there enough detail to replicate this study? So if somebody is in your field, would they be able to replicate this study without having to phone you or email you for information? And then for the reader, is there enough detail for them to work out, is this study a good study, a well-designed study? And is there enough information here for them to look at the generalizability? Can they tell whether this study is going to work in, say, all cancer patients everywhere, or just in leukemia patients who are aged 18 to 35? It's that kind of level, and you want to give that kind of information. When you're thinking about writing your methods, you want to be clear about details that someone who isn't an expert in your field would need. So for instance, if you're using very standard techniques, fine, just list the techniques, name the techniques. If you're using a really specialist technique, give us the reference so we can go and look it up. If you're doing something really specific, like you found if you don't stir the solution counterclockwise at full moon at midnight, then it doesn't work. Well, I'm not going to know that unless you tell me, so you better tell me. So it's that level of information. And you want to make sure you do that level of information at all stages: design, conduct, and analysis. So some things to watch out for when writing your methods. First off, no results. This is a method section, no results. What do I mean by that? Your method section should only include things that you would have known before you started the study. So for instance, eligibility criteria are fine. We wanted to recruit people aged 18 to 65. But what I didn't know until I actually did the study is I ended up with 40 people and their mean age was 36. That's a result. So methods, what we knew before we started; results, what we found when we actually did the study. So that's no results. And we also want to think about no justifications. Don't explain why you chose your methods in the method. It's just the recipe. What do I mean? Well, say in the methods you're telling me, oh, my participants weren't blinded, but my assessors, they were blinded. Great. Don't justify. In your discussion section, you can tell me why that was a good decision, and why that meant that your bias was minimized, and what you did to minimize your bias. Great, good things to think about. Don't put them in the methods. That's your justifications. They go into your discussion. So you've written your methods. Now every method needs to have a matching result. And usually your results section will mirror your method section, step by step. So every method you talk about will have a result. If there's methods that don't connect to a result, why are they there? Your results, your big key sentence is, what did you find? That's what we're trying to figure out. What did you find? So going through your whole results, that's the big key statement. And you can show your results using tables, using figures, and using text, whichever is most appropriate for your study, and looking at what your journal allows you to do. They may have a restriction on number of tables or number of figures, but don't repeat the data in more than one format. So you may have a big chunk of data sitting in a table. Don't repeat every data point in the text. What you can do is draw attention to interesting things. Oh, at time point 1, only this one outcome spiked, but at time point 3, none of them spiked. That's interesting to write into the text to draw attention, but you don't want to repeat every single data point. If it's in the table, fantastic, doesn't need to be repeated in the text. You also want to avoid cherry picking your results. What that means is, give us the results that fit this story, that fit this message, but don't only present your positive results, the ones that fit your hypothesis. If you measured 3 outcomes to do with your message, and 2 of them agree with your hypothesis and 1 doesn't, don't just hide that last outcome. You want to give people all of the information, all of the facts. It's not going to detract from the value of your work. Nobody is going to misjudge what's going on. They're really not. It's much better to be transparent and clear about what you found. So don't cherry pick those results. And the other thing, really important in health research, report harms. Health research studies are quite bad at this. We forget to report our harms. So even if you found no harms, fantastic. But you have to tell us. If you don't report them, we can't assume that means you didn't find any. We'd have to assume that means you didn't check. So remember, report everything, really clearly talk about harms. And there's a fantastic reporting guideline called Sample, which I mentioned in webinar 1. And I'm not going to talk through exactly how to report every statistical analysis because Sample does it so well. Things like if you have a particular analysis, how should you be reporting it? Should you use p-values? Should you use interquartile ranges? Should you use confidence intervals? Sample will run you through every single type of stats analysis and exactly how a statistical peer reviewer wants you to report them. So it's going to make your stats peer review go so much smoother. So pick that reporting guideline up. Remember that your figures and your tables should have clear and standalone captions. So if somebody picks up the table and its caption, it should be completely understandable. They don't need to refer back to the text. Similarly, legends, you need to explain every single symbol so that, again, it's a standalone document. And when you're picking your colors, remember color blindness. There's no point in using shades of red and green next to each other in a figure. A good chunk of the population is not going to be able to tell the difference between them. And there's some fantastic software out there that you can run your figures through to check that you've chosen sensible colors. So some things to watch out for. No methods in your results. You've already given the method details. You don't need to repeat them in the results. No discussion of your results, right? Just present them. Don't start talking about what they mean. Just present the results. It's the #1 thing that people do wrong in results. And lastly, no references. If you find yourself putting references in, you're either talking about the method or you're discussing the results. Pull those away. There's no references because we're just talking about what you found, not what anybody else did. So we've done the bit where you knew exactly what was going on before you even started. Now let's get into the slightly more creative bit where the reporting guidelines won't help you as much. So your discussion, we're going to start with the discussion because it's again really connected with what we did. It's made up of 4 big sections and the overarching theme is, what did it mean? What does your study results mean? So section 1 is a summary of your results, the big main results. Don't repeat every data point, but just summarize the big main results, the big message results. So it's reflecting back on your message again. In the second section, this is where you're going to cite the most literature. This is where you're taking every result that's interesting or that's important to your story and you're really testing it against the literature. So contrasting and comparing what was expected, what was unexpected, what fit your hypothesis or didn't, and maybe why. So putting your results in its place in the great big context of the literature. In the third section, you want to talk about your method. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And that's where you start to justify your method choices. Why did you pick that stats analysis? Why was this blinding strategy a good one? Every study will have weaknesses. Don't hide your weaknesses, bring them to the front, because by discussing them, you give yourself a chance to talk about them and to show to the peer reviewer that you've actually thought them through. And then this speaks to the generalizability of your results. And one tip is to start with the weaknesses and end with the strengths, because then before you go to that last section, people are thinking about, the good things about your study. And your very last section, which might be a separate conclusions, or it could be just the last paragraph of your discussion, is your great big summary, the great big take-home message. It's going to be reiterating that major result, repeating that major result, and then your message. It's the big chunky message that you've identified right at the beginning. Repeat it here and remind people, what do you want them to do next? If you want them to do further research, get specific. Do we need an external validation study? Do we need the first in-human trial? What's next? Get really specific as to what you want people to do next with your work. Things to watch out for in your discussion: no new results. Good peer reviewers will search through your paper for every number you quote in your discussion to make sure it appears in your results. So everything that you talk about in your discussion needs to be in the results. And the next one, no literature cherry picking. It's really suspicious if every paper you cite agrees with your study. That's not how science and the literature works. There's always going to be someone who found a result that doesn't fit with yours, that looks strange. That's okay. Bring it out there, talk about it. Let's be really transparent. It'll make it easier to tell whether your result is the anomaly or whether that is the anomaly. So keep bringing through all of the literature. Don't cherry pick. The introduction is basically a reflection of the discussion. It's again 4 big sections. And now we're asking, what was the big problem, the evidence gap that you were trying to tackle in this study? So in your first section, set the scene. Tell us which general academic area we are in. What are we thinking about? What are we talking about? And cite a few of those major papers. Your second section starts to get specific. What is the evidence gap? Where are things going wrong? Where do we need more research? Where is a drug maybe not working? Where are patients not being met? What's the problem? And then in your third section, what is your research question and what is your hypothesis? So summarizing exactly which part of that evidence gap you are tackling right now. And in your last section, you're going to summarize your study design, your method. So that before we start the methods, we've got that one big statement of, this is how we're going to do it. And in some fields, you'll also give a little summary of the major result that you found. That's very, very field specific. So check your field, read some big papers from your field and see, do people end the introduction with a summary of what they found or not? It'll be field specific. Now, a lot of people end up going, oh, my introduction, I'm citing loads of papers and I'm running out of space in my overall article. Your discussion section should be much longer than your introduction. Your discussion is where we really get into the meat of the literature, where we're comparing and contrasting to your results. The introduction is just enough information to get us to understand what the problem is and what you're trying to do. So that big major thing to watch out for in an introduction, it's not a literature review. It's not chapter 2 of your thesis. It really isn't. You don't need to cite an exhaustive literature search of your entire field. That's what a review is for. If you have produced that, write a review separately and cite it. You don't have space. All we need to know is enough to contextualize your study. So we've written the main study. Now we're just going to summarize it in the abstract. So abstracts are there as a selection tool. People will be looking through titles, looking through abstracts to decide what to read most. But you also need to think of them as possibly the only thing that someone will read about your study, because a very large proportion of the world doesn't have access to all full texts. So you need to be really careful that your abstract is a fantastic reflection of your study. There's 2 big types of abstracts, structured and unstructured. Your journal will tell you what they want. And the only difference is the structured abstract has headings for the 4 big sections. The unstructured doesn't, but they cover the same information. And that information is the background. What was the big problem? Where's the evidence gap? The methods. What did you do? The results, what did you find, and the conclusion, what does it mean? And those are really familiar. They're basically the key sentences we've been talking about the whole way through, which means if you use the key sentencing tool when you were writing your first big summary for each section under each section heading, you can just grab all of those and chuck them straight into your abstract. And most of your abstract is written already. And then you're going to start filling out that abstract by asking questions. You're going to make sure, have I talked about my design? Have I given my full PICO, my population intervention control? Have I talked about the whys and the whos and the whats and the whens and the wheres? Keep asking yourself questions and fill in the information into the abstract. And there are some fantastic reporting guidelines to guide you through the amount of information that needs to be in an abstract. So consort for randomized controlled trials, strobe abstracts for observational and epidemiological studies, and PRISMA for meta-analyses. These are really helpful. The main thing with your abstract, it needs to agree with the main text. The conclusions have to agree. It has to be the same. Make sure it's the same. And things like significant figures. Don't round differently. So if your discussion talks about 67.8, don't talk about 68 in your abstract. Peer reviewers will pull you up on that. And again, don't cherry pick results. You can't talk about every single result in your abstract, but give a fair reflection. Don't just put your positive results in your abstract. You want to give a fair overview. So the big things to watch out for your abstract: no new information. Everything in that abstract has to be in the paper. And avoid abbreviations. They make life difficult. So we've basically written an entire paper, an entire rough draft in 20 minutes. Well done. But again, the main thing to think about when you're writing is really just write. Don't edit yourself. Don't worry about editing yourself. Just get that draft down. Because next week, we're going to cover the process of editing yourself, of polishing your own words and language, of getting it to the stage where you're happy to send it to your supervisor and your co-authors to read. And we do that as a completely separate process. So we'll be doing that on the 5th of December. So, were there any questions about writing? So pop your questions and your comments into the comment box, and we're going to take a couple of moments to answer a couple of your questions. So apparently I have questions. This is fantastic. Just waiting for my colleague. So the first question, what do you do if you did something different from your protocol? Excellent question. So for a lot of fields, you will be publishing your protocol as a separate document, or it will exist somewhere. And even if you didn't publish it, this is a good thing to do. Your protocol is the plan you made before you started the study. And then when you were conducting the study, chances are things changed. You needed to change your protocol, you needed to change your plan based on real world conditions. And that's good experimental design, but you need to tell us what you did, right? So in your methods section and in your discussion section, depending on where it fits in, you want to give what the protocol planned and what ended up actually happening, what changed. Why? Because if somebody else is planning a study and they're planning something similar to you, it's a fantastic learning tool for them. They would probably have made the same plan as you did and then had to change it. But if they plan up front with what they know from you, amazing. Their plan is now the correct plan up front. It also makes your results more robust from a stats perspective, because we can tell what was done without knowing anything and what was done while knowing a few things. So it's important to do. But again, it's just about being really super clear and transparent. I think we have one more question. Let's have a look. Where do you tell people how you did your literature review? Okay, so that's an interesting question, because if you did a completely separate literature review that you've published, you could just cite that literature review in the first section of your introduction. If you've done a literature review for yourself, and then you want to tell us that you did, you don't really need to tell us that you did a literature review as such. If you did a systematic review to identify the study gap, you may want to think about publishing that as a separate document so that you can refer to it. It really is a separate study. It's a standalone thing. So it basically depends on what your study design was and what you've used that literature review or systematic literature review for. But the assumption will always be that you've read around. So if what you're talking about is a narrative literature review, what you've done is you read lots before you started. You don't really need to have claimed to have done that in your introduction. So I hope that helps everyone. So thank you so much for spending this time with us this morning or this evening. It's morning for us, it's evening for a lot of you, or very early morning if you're in the US. And next time we're going to be taking that rough draft and we're going to be polishing it. As always, Please send us in your comments and your questions afterwards. We've been getting some amazing questions, which have been really fun. Let's keep the conversation going as we go along. And Mike, back over to you.
Jen, can I just repeat one of the questions that you might have missed here?
Sure.
It's something that we encounter a lot as editors, and it's something that I'm sure you've got a very good answer to. Is copying key sentences from the main text to the abstract fine?
It's a good way to start, but what you will find is you're going to need to edit those down and shorten them down to get all the information you need to into the abstract. So it's a good starting point, but you'll find yourself rewording them. You've got more space for fancy, fun language in your main text. You don't really have that space in an abstract. So it's absolutely fine. It's not considered plagiarism of any sort. It's completely fine to do. But it's unusual if you could leave every key sentence standalone as it is from the main text in the abstract, simply because you don't have the space for that kind of language.
Okay, thanks very much, Jen. If we've missed some questions, we'll forward them on to Jen, and she can incorporate them in the next session as well. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming today, and until the same time next week, we'll see you then. Goodbye.
See you then.